Hello and welcome to the All Out Coach podcast. My name is Tim Mikhelashvili and I'm your host, CEO and co-founder of Amedea Pharma, life science analytics and organizational change agency that helps pharma, biotech, and healthcare systems scale their patient outcomes and business profits faster by combining sportsmanship with the scientific method via our deep metrics methodology and software application. For more information, make sure to visit AmedeaPharma.com, our website. Contact me. And also make sure to subscribe to the All Out Coach podcast on your favorite platform. Today's episode is a new premiere of the InWeekend series on the show, which highlights the online publication that I started 7 years ago, designed to inspire our leaders in pharma and other industries for the weekend and week ahead, by highlighting some of the latest commentary, research, and reports across our industries. Today's episode is titled, Why Going to Work Should Be Like Competing in a Sport. This was an article that I had written recently in order to help provide a different perspective about new ways of working, which all of us leaders and professionals and employees, consultants, volunteers, all need to revisit today because of just how much technology plays a role in our workflow and how that can be increased with the advances, as well as how much time we spend remotely versus in person, meeting with our colleagues or customers live. And so we have different types of inspiration and sources of motivation depending on the kind of workflow distribution that we choose as leaders as well as contributors to organizations. And this is why I want to start with just making a distinction between performance reviews and personal records. They're both abbreviated PR, but just for a minute, just imagine if going to work were the place where we can break our personal records rather than meet goals and merely align to our strategy. What if our leaders emphasized, not only used sports analogies, but practiced those sports principles in the operations of their organization? What could replacing only one word in the phrases personal goals in our minds mean for our motivation to show up to work and for the extent of innovation we would personally contribute? Replacing personal goals with personal records. This is an article that I had written in the InWeekend journal in which I provide a new way of working based on a lot of the experiences that I have amassed working in 7 different pharma companies over 18 years and reviewing a lot of organizational research studies in pharma and other industries as well. The companies I've worked for have ranged from large giants such as Sanofi and AstraZeneca to other startups and rare disease specialty companies, some of which succeeded to become the biggest one in their therapeutic area, others that failed despite having next generation best-in-class product based on its efficacy and safety. And so the slogan at All Out Coach is stretch yourself, lift others, where we combine the principles of data science with sportsmanship in order to keep ourselves accountable, but in order to lift other people and to inspire, not just report performance. In this article that I'm going to highlight in this podcast, I posed the question, what if going to work were like competing in a sport? Could converting performance reviews to personal records drive us to work more and to perform better also? Imagine if you asked your team members and inspired them to track their personal records and to announce them openly to the team on a regular basis. It's clearly a topic and a hypothesis that's central to our focus at Amedea Pharma that we're continuously researching. In the kind of world in which we live today, We have abundant options to monitor performance, but we do not know often what is that best and the right data, an option that is going to lead us to make decisions based on our performance and when. How do we communicate this performance and the right data that we use? And for departments such as medical affairs and pharma, which are not legally directly linked to revenue, even though paradoxically they deliver and they can transform business within any of their organizations that they're part of. Medicine is a cost, it's not an investment in many people's minds. And so is medical affairs, right? So, what if we were to turn that around and considered medical affairs to be a place that directly generates business profits and directly improves the business and the success of their organization? It's not only a cost center. We would need to provide a lot more data and utilize the right data from all the abundant options that we have today available to us. One thing that I can tell you clearly is that I've never met someone in my medical affairs department throughout the 18 years in the industry who wasn't clear about their purpose in improving healthcare quality and patient outcomes by working in a pharma company. However, I've also never met a colleague who was excited about how they were evaluated or who was excited about metrics, for example. Okay. Everything that we do is exposed to data. I think we have to revisit how we break down performance and what radical transparency and accountability really means by the concepts of sportsmanship and scientific method or data science in order to help us guide our decisions. We want to be at our best at work and we want to compete. We compete invariably for information, for training, for technology, for bonuses, for compensation that we receive versus we seek versus others as well. So let's start with the human condition, which we avoid when we as leaders guide our team members to do their best and collaborate, and we do not stress the importance of the quality and the measures of that performance. We completely ignore the natural ambition and the human condition, the potential of people to perform at their best. That's always in our subconscious. What happens when we avoid this human condition as leaders and we do not stress metrics, for example, or do not define them clearly? Well, we're left with unnecessary skepticism and ultimately an outcome that's quite the contrary to our intentions. Because when people are not clear about their metrics or when they're downplayed, you have many different interpretations of what that finish line is supposed to be in a department that doesn't have legally any responsibility or accountability for profits or sales, right? So you're left with people who are skeptics and who do not share information with their colleagues or with other departments, withhold information or the truth because they may have their own story that they're telling themselves about what being their best is. Secondly, you're left with actually higher competition when you do not share the goals or the metrics clearly, when you do not emphasize performance. So ultimately, it's not that metrics mean more competition, but it's the wrong metrics or lack of metrics completely that actually paradoxically increases the internal competition when it's presented under this disguise of unclear, complex, subjective criteria of the evaluation of the personal performance. If I were to survey my colleagues across all the years that I've worked, and even today in medical, I doubt that any of them would clearly articulate how they are evaluated, or would confirm that the way they're evaluated is actually relevant to their role or is representative of their contributions to the overall success of the organization. So you have unnecessary skepticism, you have higher competition, and you have disruption. Disruption only in its direct literal meaning, quite different from the trendy type of disruption in the context of innovation that many use today. Because you have many people working and running in different directions at one time, which is excessive. And when you have that type of disruption, you have dysfunction of teams, of interdepartmental rivalries, right? When you lack transparency of metrics and performance. Ultimately, the distinction between implicit and explicit competition can be probably summarized in a real world example in which medical leaders tell their team members to do their best, to meet with their customers, scientists, thought leaders, for example, in their territory, and to collaborate, right? They do not emphasize metrics, okay? However, at the end of the year, their sales counterpart, executive, approaches them and tells them, well, what do your medical liaisons and your team members really do? Can you give me the numbers? How many, what is the impact they've had? What are the outcomes? How many physicians did they meet with in their assigned territory? Okay. They may or may not be good or scientific metrics to begin with, but they're asked for metrics. And so at that point, the reality is that leaders, medical leaders, who want to stress collaboration and don't want to seem like they want to incite any unnecessary competition, they are then forced to tell their team members, look, guys, they're asking us for this, so we have to give them what they want. Okay? And so let's have the number of physicians that you met with this year ready to me by tomorrow. Okay? By Monday, for example, right? So they scramble at that point, and they provide data to their executives which lack integrity. This is retrospective, right? Everyone may have their own definitions, may have their own interpretations of what an interaction that's meaningful is. But essentially, the individual team members are told to go out and play in the beginning of the year and practice, collaborate, only to learn at the end of the year that they had entered a race and were being timed. And that's what creates that unnecessary skepticism, which is out of place and inconsistent with our reality today. I think it's a conscious organizational choice to quote reality and accountability in what appears to be more comfortable yet subjective and vague. The other alternative here is to provide different metrics that may be more scientific, more rigorous. Let's say the ratio of numbers of discussions or topics per interaction with a customer, or the number of actionable insights that led to headquarters collaborations as a ratio over number of interactions, for example. Okay, so they could provide these types of metrics that are continuously collected throughout the year, not only retrospectively, but that doesn't really happen. Instead, also, individual performance is not always shared with the team, because again, it's easier to remove the accountability, right? Responsibility, individual responsibility, but it's easier to blame another team or this other executives, these sales. They have a high pressure environment, and they, how they are, they have all kinds of metrics, they only care about metrics, so we have to give them what they want. It's easier to blame other teams, and it's more accepted in the corporate environment than to incentivize individual performance and to provide more recognitions, more awards, even in functions in which they may not be tied to revenue legally, even though they paradoxically directly generate business. And I've been a part of those medical teams that generated new investigator-initiated studies or conceived new late-breaking head-to-head studies or new mechanistic studies that expanded the indication of a medication or a population for which it may be used. That turned around the entire organization. And that was all medical, which is essentially involved in education of scientific leaders and thought and physicians and healthcare professionals, education and scientific exchange. But it's really education and scientific exchange that often generates millions of dollars, changes how cholesterol is treated, for example, right, based on new guidelines in patients who would not otherwise be considered high risk. Okay. But we have to be able to quantify that somehow and to collect that and to provide the data that's necessary to our external stakeholders and internal cross-functional stakeholders as well. But ultimately, it's more we versus they, right? It's teams that publicly take the grunt of the blame for failure or receive recognition for their successes. And more rarely, individuals are rewarded publicly in order to not motivate unnecessary competition. Yet behind closed doors, owners watch closely to see which individual makes the strongest contribution to the team's success, and they look for true competitors. So as a result, the message is lost in translation, and it lacks integrity. I recently interviewed Ron Carucci, who's a renowned organizational change expert, best-selling author, Forbes and Harvard Business Review editor, two-time TEDx speaker, and I interviewed him on the All Out Coach podcast, in which he discusses the ultimate costs of this internal implicit competition based on a 15-year longitudinal study of thousands of global employees at Fortune 500 companies. And he explains in his book, To Be Honest, Lead with the Power of Truth, Justice, and Purpose, that when cross-functional rivalry or unhealthy conflict is left unaddressed, an organization is almost 6 times more likely to have people withhold or distort truthful information based on this research. Let's listen to Ron in this short clip here from the podcast interview.
And the last one was cross-functional partnership or unity, the way we work with our adjacent spaces, right? So in pharma, R&D and commercial, the classic one, or discovery and development. In manufacturing, operations and supply chain, in every company, sales and marketing. The classic places where there are border wars. If the seams of the organization are stitched well, if there's cohesion and there's a sense of we at those intersections versus the typical sense of they, and they who make my life miserable and drive me crazy. This was probably the biggest surprise in the findings. You are 6 times more likely to have people behave fairly, tell the truth, and act with justice, because when you defragment the organization, you defragment the truth. But when you have rivalry, when you have we's and they's, when you have misaligned KPIs, when you have misaligned goals, when you have imbalanced resource allocations, now I have to fight to be right. So it doesn't matter whether I'm truthful or not. I just need to be right, make you wrong. Now you're 6 times more likely to have people lie, cheat, and serve their own interests first.
So as you heard, misaligned KPIs or metrics is one factor that leads to decreased collaboration internally or interdepartmental cross-functional rivalry, for example. The other point that he makes here is about imbalanced resource allocation. And for medical teams in pharma and biotech, the investment in medical, this diverse and growing, multifunctional, but very misunderstood group, has decreased in relation to profits and revenue in the industry over the last few years. This is data that was recently shared by Astellas's VP of Medical Affairs at Financial Times conference. And similarly, on a global level, healthcare is still considered a cost by phrases that we use in health economics, such as healthcare utilization, healthcare costs. We rarely think of healthcare as an investment, even though our healthcare utilization in the United States is 1/5 of our GDP. Yet it is still referred to as utilization, right? So we're clearly increasing the costs of healthcare, but we're not really giving it the fair description that maybe it is an investment in innovation. Yes, granted, in the United States, our system is more designed for rescue care, acute care, with high quality. However, we are now finding that the government and our global geopolitical environment is pushing us towards more preventive care, which has its rationale. But to what cost of innovation should that come? And that depends on just how we approach and we communicate our contributions and how we move through different parts of the healthcare systems. Are we able to operate? Are we able to share data that's interoperable? So it's really about access, continuity, and quality of care. However, we need to approach why we need more investments in healthcare in different ways. And I think sports, again, is an analogy that we use in every business, including healthcare, right? But they remain as analogies. We do not integrate them into our operations of our organization. We do not practice what we preach through those analogies. And so that's the next step that Amedea Pharma, the agency that I founded, wants to help ensure that we start doing more. Okay, so references to competition, of course, as I mentioned, are abundant. But the difference is that the rules designed in sports, unlike in business, are fundamentally based on objective outcomes or results that are seen transparently in the same manner by all spectators and participants. Right? So if someone is told to run a race, they're measured by same stopwatch, right? Or a photo finish that determines, let's say, two top performers. However, in business, in medical organizations, we're essentially being told to run a race without knowing where the finish line is. Or we have many different ways by which we define that finish line in healthcare. Also, the personal component, is lacking. The personal recognition component of competition and performance in healthcare and other industries. In sports events, commentators and coaches, they transparently disclose a personal record that's displayed on the TV screen, for example, when they compete against each other. Yet in business, our PRs, if you will, our personal records, are our resumes or projects that seemingly have no concrete translation or specific value, and they're not shared with the entire team in a competitive field of employees. So we are using different types of clocks or stopwatches in order to measure the race of our healthcare professionals. Most of our business leaders tell their employees to run a 100-meter sprint or a marathon through goals they assign, yet the clocks they use all differ from each other, and the finish line is invisible. Sports is a celebration of personal accountability for performance. Results are emphasized, and prizes are based on transparent rules and contributions to team success, for example, with the rules that are known from the beginning of the competition all the way to the end. So when we reflect a little further, work in most organizations more closely resembles war than sports, because war participants have less accountability than during peacetime for resorting to illegal weapons, tools, or skills if they're necessary to win. However, sports, on the other hand, celebrates personal accountability for performance through fair play, through sportsmanship, in which An athlete that uses a performance-enhancing substance is stripped of a medal. And we've seen those examples across all sports, as well as teams not being able to represent their country, for example, at the Olympics or at various different championships. So going to work as if competing in a sport we want to master can bring just the kind of certainty and inspiration that all of us are searching today. And so many of us are missing in the world of work, regardless of the economic climate or market volatility. Many argue that the pressure to perform and to produce today can be overbearing anyway in most industries. So why introduce more internal competition? Well, the answer may lie in discovering which pressure is really greater and more harmful. That of vague and artificial uncertainty about the fairness and relevance of how we are evaluated, which we create by design ourselves as leaders and succumb to as employees, or a sense of certainty that we build continuously through contests and playgrounds and prizes that we design at work, with not just one contest a year, but many and different competitions. So a true sports view of work can spark life in the least competitive or driven employee because it eliminates questions, propaganda, political waste, freeing up all individuals to acknowledge the pressure in a tough market, but focus on their personal progress relentlessly to create solutions rather than question why they received a particular end of the year evaluation, missed a bonus, promotion, or training opportunity, for example. We no longer have to manipulate data, people and their emotions, lead them on, corner or crowd them, but instead can spend more effort coaching each other to break their personal records or PRs from one contest or time period to the next. This is the concept that we launched with the Medical Affairs Innovation Olympics event in 2022, when Olympians, Olympic gold medalists, Olympic coaches shared their inspiration with leading scientists, physicians, healthcare professionals, and innovators in medicine to compete, provide each other with feedback across multiple stages of elimination, and learn in the spirit of the Olympic Village, which we've had now for 2 years, and we're running in Innovation Olympic trials globally currently. So make sure to visit AmedeaPharma.com to see some of the previous winners of our event, which has drawn giants in pharma such as Roche, Takeda, and Astellas to submit ideas, as well as other startups that have since then raised seed funding, have won in other competition and events. So it's a very unique ideation event that has now demonstrated that medical affairs, which is not as used to receiving feedback live in person through votes for their ideas, for example, or which is not as open to seeing how one individual performs versus another openly, transparently, can actually compete, was increased their engagement because the level of excitement, even in the Olympic trials that I held live in person last year in Tennessee, was unmistakable. It was completely unique. It was different from what you experience, every day. So what if you could do that not just at this Innovation Olympics event that we organize every year, but you could do that throughout the year at your organization. So that's one kind of perspective that I cannot wait to hear from those of you who listen to this podcast, and those of you who experiment with it in your organization. So previously, I've also talked about the different motivational factors, and I've reviewed a lot of organizational change research that explores the human condition, right? The ambition at work. In the 1980s, Professors Edward Deci and Richard Ryan from the University of Rochester distinguished the 6 main reasons why people work, which Neil Doshi and Lindsay McGregor adapted their framework for the modern workplace. And these 6 main reasons why people work, according to this research, are ranked in their ultimate probability for either positively influencing work or negatively influencing work or motivation. So the 6 main reasons why people work are ranked in their likelihood to positively influence motivation or negatively or inhibit motivation. So those that stimulate motivation are number 1 and the highest positive motivational factor is play. When you go to work because of the actual work that you do, you're motivated by the kind of work that you do. Number 2 is purpose. Impact of the work that fits our identity. Physicians who take the Hippocratic oath to do no harm. They know that why they work. Even if the metrics are the worst or they don't understand the metrics, they'll still continue to work because they believe in the purpose. Potential. The promise of a promotion. You become a teacher not because you like teaching, but because you want to become a principal of that school. So that's ambition. That's only number 3. So these are the 3 positive motivational factors. The 3 negative motivational factors are then number 4, emotional pressure. Due to peer pressure from family or friends, fear, other social external forces, economic pressure, sustainability, right? Gaining a financial reward or avoiding financial hardship is why you join a company. And the least and most inhibitive factor is inertia. When you couldn't even describe why it is that you go to work only because it's Monday, for example. Work becomes a daily routine, the reason of which we cannot explain. And so Neil Doshi and Lindsay McGregor, as I have shared in my previous podcast here in All Out Coach, have designed a prospective ToMo motivational score that's now validated across tens of thousands of employees across the globe. And it's used to rate a wide range of well-known companies such as Trader Joe's and Southwest, among others. ToMo subtracts the negative factors based on responses to 6 questions rated on a scale of 1 to 7 each from the positive factors and normalized to maximum score of 100. Now, what has this research shown? Some of the processes that most strongly influence employee motivation are role design, it turns out, organizational identity, career ladders, and community, among others. So these findings, I think, highlight the critical role that operations and human resources divisions play in designing job responsibilities appropriately to optimally distribute responsibilities across different functions as well. The results provide concrete evidence to suggest that executives need to prioritize the creation of a clear behavioral code as well, company culture, mission statements, to create fluid exchange of information across the organization, talent management programs geared towards career progression. So even though the performance review process itself ranks low on this list, other factors such as compensation or career progression are often direct outcomes of the feedback exchanged during this assessment period. Another reason why performance reviews may not be thought to play a role in motivation based on this research is because they usually only take place once a year, maybe twice, and are rarely celebrated or recalled by most. I don't know of one person who loves the performance management process. And that's what we want to change at Amedea Pharma, by really taking a more objective, transparent, and more continuous look at managing, or rather breaking down performance, and maybe considering this PR as not performance reviews, but personal records that you want to inspire. Immediate and continuous feedback of one's performance is what intrinsically inspires sports athletes to break their records. Yet in business, performance reviews have a notoriously bad reputation, even though they represent a critical chance to inspire and incentivize higher quality effort. Recent data that was featured in Harvard Business Review from a survey of 1,000 companies, and these were Fortune 500 companies, conducted by the Corporate Executive Board, CEB, indicates that 66% of employees are strongly dissatisfied with the performance evaluations they received in their organizations. And 65% of them believe that performance evaluations were not even relevant to their jobs. This is something that we have previously also confirmed in the pharma industry, in medical affairs in particular. Through global webinars that we've hosted, we've seen only 5% of our colleagues who believe that metrics are meaningful state that in their responses. In the latest 2023 Global Metrics Benchmark Survey, which was designed by Amedea Pharma and executed in partnership with Medical Affairs Professional Society, MAPS, as well as the BCG, Boston Consulting Group, we surveyed 51 global pharma companies. And we found that 70% of them stated that they do not use any methodology at all to study the relationship between their functions, activities, and outcomes, which questions the relevance, the predictability, and ultimate meaning of metrics. Secondly, even though almost all the KPIs or metrics they use are externally facing to improve patient outcomes or healthcare quality, for example, 96% of leaders surveyed communicate these outcomes internally, compared to only 27% who share them with their healthcare customers or with their cross-functional partners internally. So what that means is that we are a customer-oriented function, medical affairs, which educates our customers, our healthcare professionals, yet we never communicate the performance or the quality of our contributions to the very customers whom we serve, when you think about it. And so that raises questions of, is it because we are not confident in our quality of our work or our education? Does this explain why many people do not even know or hear about this function of medical affairs? You know about R&D, they know about, they've heard about marketing or other functions, but very few people, even within clinical development, within R&D, which is really an adjacent function, which receives 2/3 of the budget across pharma. I've met people after 18 years of working in medical affairs and seeing the potential of what we can do, the impact. I still run into VPs in clinical development who don't know, who could not describe to you what medical affairs really is. The other potential reason for why we don't share our quality of education or our metrics and our outcomes with the customers whom we serve is that because they may be prohibited by our own internal regulatory processes, which may be outdated, because you would improve the quality of the information that you share or you teach to your customers or healthcare professionals. You need to get that feedback directly from them, openly, transparently, and systematically. The other important part of this deficit is near complete avoidance of measuring how colleagues work together or train each other. Yes, it's great to have externally facing metrics, but what about the value or the impact that a medical affairs professional has when they train an entire sales force of 200 people about a new study and a new potential indication, or that is supported by that new study that's about to be presented, or that's already been presented and published, that ultimately the sales reps use to magnify their messaging, to change it to healthcare professionals who now receive updated information, and that allows millions of more patients to receive that treatment as a result of that publication, which is now available on their insurance plans, healthcare plans, right? We never really measure that impact, those outcomes. And therefore, we are often completely discounting our internally facing metrics and operations systematically, or the value of L&D, learning and development based metrics. So the gaps in this perceived meaningfulness of the most common performance evaluations used, and ultimate accountability to the community of a medical affairs function serves, can possibly explain the relative invisibility of this specialty. So our approach ultimately to measuring and communicating performance demonstrates how we view our own responsibility which can ultimately determine and improve our reputation in our industry. Now, more than 90% of American companies provide performance evaluations at least once a year, which cost an average of $3,000 per person per year and translates into billions of dollars in weeks, if not months, wasted on meaningless processes and subjective decisions. A recent Harvard Business Review article highlighted this particular deficit, a collaboration between Columbia Business School as well as the NUS Business School and National University of Singapore by Jinsek Chun, a PhD candidate at Columbia, Joel Bruckner, Philip Hedelman professor at Columbia Business School, and David de Kremer at NUS in Singapore, National University of Singapore, and also founder and director of the Center on AI Technology for Humankind. And in their study, they surveyed 1,000 US and Dutch employees who either compared their own performance over time, known as temporal comparison, or against their colleagues, social comparison. And the results indicated that employees considered performance reviews more personalized, more relevant, and fair when they were compared to their own performance over time versus to that of others. And that's a sports component there. That's of trying to do your best, be at your best, set your personal records there. However, not all comparisons among employees are equal, right? And from an organizational vantage point, they're indispensable in order to match the right of individuals to the right responsibility. So the leader of a department or over an organization will invariably have to somehow quantify or compare how one employee does in one particular role versus another in order to maybe offer change roles, change positions, just like in a sports team, for example. It's very important to consider the following questions when we conduct such analyses of our individuals. Are colleagues evaluated only by their manager and their leadership, or by those people whom their work influences directly across the organization? Are they addressed by both internal and external customers? Are they accountable for only performance or also their behaviors? So, with these variables in mind, the findings are likely not surprising on a philosophical level, as we are told from childhood to become champions by simply trying our best to improve. Yet most leaders, particularly in large corporations, do not find such approaches practical or feasible because their vantage point demands a global snapshot of performance at a given time without the individual details. So as leaders who strive to inspire strong performance, we're caught between a dichotomy in competition that promotes competition against self versus against others, if you will. Is it that these performance reviews that are standard across the organizations in Holland, in the United States, are they not relevant? Are they not accurate? Do they not consider all of these different types of measures of performance? And which is why individuals may not even believe, may not consider them valuable. And that's why they don't want to be compared against someone outside of their category, if they're their employee. And that's why they'd rather be compared against their own self. However, I raise the question that if we change the standards, if we have more considerations about how to make that comparison between one employee and another more objective, more systematic, and share them transparently, maybe these results may change next time we study them. And I'll finish with one final interview of a double Olympian, our keynote speaker at the inaugural Medical Affairs Innovation Olympics that were held in 2022, Chris Cook from England. He joined me on the All Out Coach podcast and shared an important breakthrough moment in his road to becoming a champion when his coach convinced him to finally start entering international competitions against much tougher, experienced, and higher-ranked swimmers. Though he had already made important progress to become one of the top swimmers in his native UK, competing against himself in his mind and beating his personal records, it was only when he started to compete against other and European champion swimmers that he began to stretch himself even farther and become a champion and represent his country at the Olympics in Athens in 2004 and in Beijing in 2008. Okay, let's listen to Chris Cook.
There was another turning point, and this was more competitive. At the age of 21, I was struggling to break the British ranks. I was struggling to break through the British ranks. I was getting into the top 5, top 4, but I wasn't getting onto the international teams, the big international teams. And my coach sat me down and he said, you know, the times that you're doing, if you eventually get onto the team, you're going to be in a really good standing when you get there. But I didn't think about that at the time. So every competition I went to locally in the UK was a high level competition because all of the people ahead of me were in the top 15 in the world. So all the other 4 breaststroke swimmers. There was one day I'd gone from 5th to 2nd. I'd made a team. I'd made a European team. And when I got to the European Championships in Ireland, I got through the heats into the semi-final and into the final. And it was the first time I realized that actually, often when we think we've got it tough, it's the tough bits that bring out the true athlete inside. You know, I had this dogfight for years with these guys who were in the UK and I couldn't get on these international teams. Once I broke through, I wasn't just going and making the heats. I was going through and now starting to get close to the podiums. You know, your competition can be your biggest asset. If you use your competition, it can be your biggest asset, but you've got to let it in. You've got to let it in. And that was a big turning point, a massive lesson at the age of 21. Huge.
Now you mentioned, Chris, that it's important to let that in. Do you remember that you, at that moment, you were appreciating competition, or how fierce did competition seem to you at the time?
Yeah, I don't think I was at the time, actually. I think that was the realization. That was the moment that I realized I was missing something here. I was missing a trick. You know, I would go on training camps, but I wouldn't leave myself open. I'd be very guarded. You know, I was there with the rest of my competition. And if I gave anything away, they would use it against me. And yeah, there's an element of that. Everybody's looking for that competitive edge. But actually, once those walls start breaking down, they start to expose your weaknesses, which is great. Most people are going, what? You celebrate that? Yeah, because we're looking for those 1%. We're looking for those, if you can get 10%, get it. You know, when you get to that level, 10% is everything. You're generally looking for much smaller percentage gains than that. And for me, it felt as though actually at the age of 21, that was the final frontier for me to really challenge myself on. Went on a training camp to Australia that very next year with all my competitors pretty much. And that was the moment that I started to break down the walls and realize that collaboration was the way forward. Sharing was the way forward. We were competing against each other. And I remember being in one training session in Australia and the coach had just said to us, right, we're going to do this part of this set. I'd like you all to be within 3% of your personal best. Well, that's almost unheard of. That is such a challenge. Mm-hmm. And as we stood up and raced each other in this training session, I thought, we've got a world-class training session here. This is, you know, I don't have to manufacture it. It's actually here. I'm racing world number 4 right next to us, world number 8 on the other side, world number 11 just on the inside of him, and I'm only breaking the top 20. And that was the moment that I thought, do you know what? I'm mixing it with the best here, and I'm holding my own, and I've got something to give. And yeah, I think those milestones are really important as you go through your career.
Yeah, what a great memory, that conversation. And I think I want to close with a few points here and summarize the lessons from this article in this perspective. Competing against yourself as you compete more against others. And this is the competition paradox that we have to consider in business. Your members that are essential to your organization's success, they have an ambition and a potential to be at their best. And we have to bring that out in them. And so competition is not a bad word. Metrics is not a bad word. Collaboration is important, but you have to also measure that collaboration and incentivize it with your metrics. Because metrics are not an end all. They're not your outcomes. Metrics are not outcomes. That's one myth. Okay. Metrics are merely an index of the relationship between activities and outcomes. Metrics are not outcomes. Metrics can help you deliver those outcomes. And the third myth that we often hear is that metrics are meaningless. It's really the outcomes that count, right? No, because if you only measure outcomes, or if you only measure your employees by what they ultimately deliver, you will only be guessing at how to reproduce those similar masterpieces or successes, if you will, or avoid the negative outcomes unless you have that feedback system in place. Because there's many different ways in which you can beat a world record or personal record in a race. You can undermine other people. You can use performance-enhancing substances. You can also compromise your organization, make it more liable for a lawsuit. And so we have to think about this competition paradox. Yes, try to incentivize your employees to be at their best, to beat their personal records, but also create the types of contests that matter in a very, very competitive environment today that is data-centric, that allows you all different types of options with which to monitor and break down performance into activities and outcomes separately. So we have to learn to compete against ourselves in our mind, leave all the other competitors out of it in your mind, visualize just being better than you were before. When we compete against others as well, we need to constantly increase the challenge, compete against other people, get new mentors who will help you get better, and then enter the types of competitions or try yourself in a different role, in a new category, or even within your own category, continue to learn voluntarily, not because you're assigned something. That's when you make the largest leaps, such as the Innovation Olympics, for example, that we have coming up October 1st through the 16th. The Innovation Olympic trials are underway right now already at Amedea Pharma. The submissions close at 5 p.m. on April 1st, so I invite you personally on behalf of our steering committee of 8 expert speakers and judges from previous events. Okay? So the ultimate decision we make in how we design our metrics or performance reviews depends on our own ambitions to break our own personal records to contribute to the success of our organizations. Remember, as Les Brown said, we fail not because we aim high and miss, but we aim low and hit the targets. So if you work in healthcare, pharma, biotech, if you're a patient or patient advocate, let's try to aim higher. Let's face our condition as sports athletes, and let's keep ourselves and our colleagues and our organizations accountable. Our leaders are looking for new ways of work, as well as our employees, our team members, our referees. Let's think about how we can create teams of learners, leaders, and competitors who can help our organizations grow, improve our healthcare quality at scale. With those thoughts, I thank you for your attention. Make sure to subscribe to All Out Coach on your favorite platform. Share it with your friends. Subscribe to the InWeekend newsletter on LinkedIn. And visit the AmedeaPharma.com website with lots of exciting news to come this year, 2024.